to the Gregarious Mammal Podcast. This is Chris.
And this is Kate.
And we come to you today from a sunny but very cold Berlin to bring you a little bit of a links show. Just to remind you, for previous episodes, go to gregariousmammal.com/podcast. And to support the show, if you like what you're about to hear, go to the same URL/support. How have you been, Kate?
Very well. Very busy, actually. Since I last have been talking with our listeners, I've increased my hours in one of my jobs, working for a venture capital advisory company who work in industrial IoT. So that's been very much consuming my time, and I have a slew of articles to be finished for D-Zone, where I have interviewed people, I've transcribed the interviews, and I'm just due to pop it all together and send it off into the, into the interwebs.
I think you mean you're moving it from one interweb to another, really.
Well,
but,
yeah. Interweb sounded a bit more exciting. That's why I said it, I guess.
I think interweb actually sounds kind of outdated. It sounds like a 90s term.
I don't actually know. I don't know why that it popped in my head. I think I thought of it because I was reading that article on open source, sort of old school stuff.
Well, on that note, you gave us a very unsubtle bridge there. We're going to start the show with a belated birthday wish. 20 years to open source. I'm referring directly to an article here on opensource.com, but it was reported on other outlets. On February the 3rd of 20 years ago, so 1998, the term open source was coined, and this involved a few people. You can read the article to find out more. And Kate actually said when we were discussing the links for the show, I thought it was older. And open source is it was sort of a better termed term for free software to remove confusion over the difference between free and open source. It's also an interesting article because it sort of highlights the importance of marketing a new term. Anyone can make up a new term, but you have to get people to use it. And they had people like Tim O'Reilly of O'Reilly Publishers sort of helping them push that term out into the community. So, yeah, it's a sort of interesting potted history.
Yeah, it was an interesting article. And I always quite enjoy hearing how things come about with new terminology or even, of course, new technology. And we do have to thank Christine Peterson for that.
And moving on to our first link after that little birthday greeting. This is an article from ZDNet, I don't know how you want to pronounce it, called Tech and the Future of Transportation. And I suppose this is interesting in a couple of ways. Firstly, because often the future is always less interesting than it was promised to be. And we're basically still going around in iteratively improved transport that fundamentally hasn't changed in quite a while. And this is an article that basically sort of sums up where we're at with the forthcoming vehicles. Like, a lot of people already thought we'd be having automated cars. Why are they not here yet? Also, it goes into like the Hyperloop option, drones, and a few other things. And actually, we haven't put it on as a link in the show, but I would also highly recommend you watch the launch video of the rocket that SpaceX. Was it SpaceX? Yeah, SpaceX just launched. And it's also amazing because it's reusable, which has always been one of the big issues with space travel. So yeah, anything to say here, Kate?
Yeah, I mean, it's an area of technology I've followed fairly closely for a number of years, and I thought the article was quite good. I think the Gartner analysis was pretty apt. And it's worth reminding people that, there's probably as many people at the moment working towards, if we look at autonomous vehicles, working towards level 3 as they are level 5. And you've got a real delineation between the OEMs who decide to, tender out all the individual component services, and those who are trying to DIY the whole lot themselves and, maintain that proprietary knowledge. And this is what slows down some of the innovation. There is a lot of well-being and kind of good intentions for collaboration within the sectors. And this is where it becomes very important when you factor in things like smart cities. But, this stuff takes a long time. It's a lot of money and it's a lot of time. And I think some of the most interesting innovations will come fairly fast. For example, we already have facets of V2V communication where vehicles can communicate with each other. I think one of the biggest test areas has been emergency vehicles. And it's even stuff which sounds fairly really? But there's current reality that if you're driving a car with the windows up and you have music on, you can't hear for example, an ambulance. So they have to have something that cuts through the music.
Or my grandfather who was deaf and didn't hear it. But you could tune into someone's hearing aid or something and cut right through.
Yeah. So there's those sorts of stuff that's happening. And it's worth also considering that, some of this stuff will only be most effective in the first probably 20 years of implementation, maybe 30 years even, where you've got a city infrastructure, like a physical infrastructure that's conducive to connected vehicles and drones. Like when we talk about drones, the most, the technology is kind of already there. It's all working reasonably well, but the pain point is very much about the last mile problem, which they refer to, where do you drop off the parcels? Because I think we all have this utopian image that this drone is going to rock up to our apartment and somehow alert us that there's a parcel out the front and we go downstairs and pick it up or something like that.
What do you do if you're not there?
It's not quite going to happen like that. Yeah. We know that, we know in Berlin alone there is, I can think of at least 5 or 6 startups competing just in this parcel delivery space. Yeah. But the main challenges are to do with, firstly, the laws at present make it very difficult to operate a drone without it being in sight. So there actually has to be someone physically on the ground walking around.
Really?
Able to see the drone, yeah. There are some exemptions to this, and the laws in the UK are a little bit more flexible than the ones in the US. Yeah,
that was interesting. They were talking about how they've been testing it in the UK.
Yeah, because they're a little bit more flexible there. But, a lot of people are kind of picturing a scenario where there'll be central drop-off points where the drones go with the parcels, whether it's some kind of field or it's a warehouse or what have you. An outdoor environment, I guess you'd say. And then there's some type of capacity for it to be transported to your home or your office or what have you. And that's where you're going to need that connectivity between drones, between distribution centres, between shipping and logistics, and the transport that takes it to the last mile.
Actually, no, this article is actually full of lots of quite interesting things, and there's a figure one here from a Deloitte survey, which I find quite fascinating. So the question was, percentage of consumers who think fully self-driving vehicles would not be safe, 2018 versus 2017. And firstly, it's quite remarkable where in most cases between 2017 and 2018, it's typically at least a 20 to 30% drop drop in the number of people who think it will be unsafe. So more people think it will be safe. But I also find it quite interesting that some of the higher numbers are not the countries you would think. That's right. Japan and Korea are some of the ones who worry the most. And these are countries that, in our thoughts anyway, are already fairly automated. And you think would be used to having the thought of having an automated car. And then a country like Germany, where they're so opposed to automation in other ways, is actually fairly positive. It's quite strange.
It's an interesting juxtaposition. And I think that physical landscape I referred to by using the example of the drones is going to be even more pervasive when we actually look at the connected vehicles, whether they're at level 3 or 5, eventually 5. Because you need a certain landscape. I mean, most of the testing has been in an environment of test beds where it's, long strips of road with some, in a built up city areas. There's already been challenges with terrain when it comes to things like sand or, dirt roads or snow or things like that. We know that in parts of Europe, for example, there's extremely windy cobblestoned roads, and I imagine it would be the same or in regard to unwieldy terrain when you look at parts of India and Asia, where it could be quite difficult for these vehicles to navigate, and they may very well be roads that, in general, people focus on having a moped or something, or by foot as an alternative. Well, currently,
I highly recommend you have a read of this article.
Definitely
on ZDNet by Charles McClellan. But you gave us a nice segue into the next article. You talked about smaller roads, going the last mile on foot, etc. Well, what's another vehicle people could use, Cate? And this leads very nicely to our next article. Off you go.
Oh, you mean the hovercraft?
The hovercraft? No, I meant the bike, Cate.
Yeah. I know, the bicycle.
Oh, that was a joke. Facetious. Okay, sorry. All right.
Yeah. Oh, it's a joke. Of course it was a joke. Yeah. This is Bring On the Bikocalypse. And I'm talking about the humble two-wheeled bicycle, obviously.
One of the oldest forms of technology we still use.
Yeah, and it actually refers to that. Being, that most cities were planned at a time when the only transport was the bicycle. And it's true. We know that in Europe. I mean, maybe not big cities where you've got big roads like parts of America and Australia, but other places, not so much. And the question they're asking, and I'll read this out because it's quite nice. Are cities doomed to be forever tainted by the original sin of their birth date? Will all cities built around cars feel grim and soulless for generations to come? Or like the complex emergent organisms they are, can they evolve into human-scaled places with real soul and a sense of place? And it talks about some of the challenges of city planning when it comes to areas where you either have, your commuter cities, or you have a lack of public transport, or other forms of accessibility.
I actually found this interesting on several counts.
Yeah, sure.
The first one was, because this has struck me recently, going back to Melbourne recently, late last year, but being in Berlin as well. Melbourne is obviously a modern city built in at a particular time, although it's actually fairly well organised around trams, but I think that's more of just a luck or anything else. And then a city like Berlin, and actually Berlin is smaller in terms of population, but has probably better public transport. And Melbourne is very much built around the car. And as the suburbs expand, basically you have to drive. If you live beyond a certain distance, there's no choice but to drive, because it's a lot quicker to whack up cookie-cutter housing than it is to build train lines.
That's right.
But this article also goes into another aspect that we haven't got to yet. This aspect of this recent wave, or this recent infestation, some might say, of the dockless bikes. Just for a quick bit of context, so there has been for some time a lot coming from a company called Bixi, which is actually from Canada originally, the docked bikes. And there's a few different schemes around the world. So basically, to plan these networks, you have to figure out where to put the docks, and people have to return bikes to a dock, which sort of limits the usefulness of them, because you have to rely on putting in a dock in a place that people want to use it. Whereas the dockless bikes that have appeared more recently are just free. Well, not free. I mean, free as in they don't have to be tied to any location. People can take them somewhere, and then someone else will pick that one up and take it back somewhere else, and on it goes. And they're trackable by GPS, etc.
Is there some kind of lock related to an app?
Yes, exactly. They all have a back wheel lock that is unlocked with an app. Or most cases, maybe some have cards or something, but in most cases it's locks. And again, Berlin actually had one of these in the past, sort of homegrown alternative that I've seen in a few cities around Europe. But then recently there's been this onslaught, an invasion of these Chinese companies. O-Bike, Mobike, what's the other one? Moxie? I can't quite remember. Ofo, there's a whole bunch of them. The interesting thing is, so in Melbourne and Sydney didn't really have the docked bike scheme before. So they actually, when I was there, they had them on for free for the month of November because they wanted to get people to use them. So my friend and I used one and it was great. We rode it around, and Sydney's not great for public transport, so it was really good. In Melbourne, though, who had a pre-existing docked bike scheme, people were just dumping them in the river, and they were causing all sorts of problems. Which, you know, some of that is something to do with people. It's not really the bike's fault per se. Just one thing. And then recently they've actually emerged in Berlin as well. And I would say, and I've asked a few friends here, I have not seen a single person using them. They basically, I see some of them in exactly the same place for the past few weeks, primarily because there's plenty of pre-existing bike schemes here. Yeah, and this article goes into a little bit of that as well. And I think you brought up an article a couple of months ago about these sort of dockless bike wastelands that have popped up as well.
But my question is actually how it was working when you were in Australia, because in Australia, by law, you have to have a bike helmet.
Yeah. So
and if you're a tourist, you're not going to BYO.
They all had helmets attached to them, much the same as with the docked scheme. I know to listeners this might seem crazy, but this was a similar problem with the docked bikes that helmet wearing is mandatory in Australia. So they had to actually supply free helmets to allow people to use them, which is kind of strange. Okay. And there was a myriad of helmets in various shapes of disarray.
It's worth noting too that, like, whilst you're a fairly experienced cyclist and the person you are with is very, very, very experienced, Sydney is widely considered one of the most dangerous cycling cities in the world. Because of the intolerance of cyclists.
Also just because it's a very much European-style city, and the bike lanes just go all random places and things like that.
Well, they disappear, so you might feel you're safely on a bike lane, then it just disappears and you're on a highway or something.
Or on a pavement or something with people swearing at you. Yeah.
So I would question that, you know, the usage because of that. But conversely, I'd say when you look at the lack of uses in Berlin, I would say one of the reasons is most people own bikes here. I think it's 1 in 7 have a bicycle. It's very high. And unfortunately, there's also a very high rate of theft here, bike theft, where the bikes get sent to other countries like Poland and sold there. So it's a difficult one. And I could see if you're someone who's had a bike stolen more than once, I don't know, Chris has had one stolen, the appeal of just using one of these bicycles periodically as an alternative.
Oh,
to
definitely, and also because
I'm surprised. I think you might see people go to that. Because
I've actually been thinking of it for that reason, and also for the reason of, like, if I want to take my bike on the train, you have to pay for it. Whereas often when I actually want to use a bike is, like, it's 5-minute walk from the nearest station to our house. It's not that far, but if it's late and it's cold and I just want to get home and there's a bike outside the station and it takes me 1 minute to get home instead, I don't have to worry about getting the bike on and off the train, etc. That's actually a perfect use case. And also Berlin is very flat. Sydney and Melbourne are quite hilly, and these bikes are not great. But in a flat city like Berlin, they're actually perfect, which does beg the question. I mean, my bigger question on all these schemes is these are huge Chinese companies with a lot of government investment into them. But I just don't know how they're making any money, especially based on their Western usage. I mean, maybe in China they're used massively, but based on their Western usage, I don't see how these companies are making any money, but I guess they are. Yeah, I don't know if you have done any more digging into that, but...
No, I would assume they get a lot of early investment, and there may be some... I would be interested to know the longevity of some of these companies as well, whether there's been a few in the past that have gone on the wayside, and how their business models differ, perhaps.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure. I haven't really it's not something I've ever looked into.
No, it's quite fascinating, actually. It's strange that they're making such a comeback as well. Like, the bike is like the record player. It's a technology that refuses to go away.
I think it is also that issue that there are a lot of places that are inaccessible for public transport. Yeah. And whilst, we've been lucky to live now in a city that has very, very good public transport compared to most cities, while it's not cheap, but it's good. For a lot of places, you don't have that option,
All right, well, enough about the past, present and future of transport. Let's move on to our next section.
Okay, now I want to talk about a topic that we kind of predicted last year would become a very pervasive topic this year, and it's the one about, I guess, the ethics of technology, and particularly in this use case, social media. This is an article from the New York Times from Nellie Bowers, and it's titled "Early Facebook and Google Employees Form Coalition to Fight What They Built." And it's basically what it sounds like. It's a group of Silicon Valley technologists who kicked off with some of this technology in the early days. They've created a Centre for Humane Technology, which, along with a media watchdog group called Common Sense Media, plans an anti-tech addiction lobbying effort and an ad campaign at 55,000 public schools in the US. So they've got $7 million in funding to do this, and also, $50 million in donated media and airtime from partners including Comcast and DirecTV. And their aim there is to look at educating students, parents and teachers about the dangers of technology, including the depression that can come from the heavy use of social media.
I mean, we've come back to this topic several times, and Cate and I are both now members of a collective here in Berlin called the Good Technology Collective, which is probably less high profile because we don't have any, America and always gets priority. But with some similar aims and goals. And there's also the Tech Workers Collective also in the US, which is more aimed at the kind of workers' rights more than the users' rights. But this is a growing movement, and I'm still it's something I'm very interested in, but I must admit I'm kind of rapidly trying to catch up with because there's so much happening at once, and trying to figure out what to do instead is often the problem I have. I've worked in this industry for a long time, and I know and I can see that certain things I've worked on are being used in ways that I'm unhappy with, but what do I do instead? This is kind of a complexity I'm having. And it's the same thing here. Like if you build a data processing tool, it can be used in a myriad of ways, and not every way you're going to be happy with. But does that mean you don't make it? Or what do you actually do? It's an interesting conversation that I'm still processing. And I've also been speaking to some engineering friends recently who told me that certain universities actually, even software engineers, do sign a sort of code of ethics, but it's not like the Hippocratic Oath with doctors where if you break it, then you're struck off or anything. It's fairly optional. But it's something I'd be interested to dig more. I mean, one thing that strikes me about this particular effort is the people involved are highly successful people. It's not like they, worked at Facebook or Google or somewhere else and had some kind of ethical dilemma and a breakdown and became, some other career. They're all working. A lot of them are still working in tech. Like, Justin Rosenstein, who created the Facebook like button. He's been quite vocal in the media. I know we've referred to the article in The Guardian a number of times where he talked about, his feelings about detoxing and all from technology and all that kind of stuff. He's a co-founder of Asana. So these people aren't what am I trying to say? They haven't lost out by technology. Like they're talking about, like this person, a venture capitalist called Chamath Palihapitiya, I think that's how you say it, an early employee at Facebook, said in November that the social network was ripping apart the social fabric of how society works. Well, they're a VC, it's not ripping their life apart. They're not losing. None of these people are losing out. It's interesting. It's a shame that it's a shame that the problem always has to be solved by a perceived elite. Not that either of us are any better.
I wouldn't call either of us terribly elite. We're pretty average people. But I think what I'm maybe saying is that it's kind of like this notion that, it's a little bit dictatorish in some respects. And, you know, it's easy to kind of focus on the negatives of, for example, social media or Google. I mean, Google, what are they talking about? Are they talking about the evils of a search engine? Like, you know, what is their actual complaint? I'm not sure. Because, you know, we know for many people.
It's actually it's the addictiveness that most of them are arguing over, the addictiveness of constantly checking streams, being disconnected from the world around you. Like, they actually have some fairly specific concerns.
Cyber addiction.
And I am becoming more concerned about some of these myself. And I actually, to be a little blunt here in public, I think I'm more concerned about this stuff than you, personally, and also in the wider world. I also spent a couple of days this week with some friends who have children, and witnessing. So they're not using Facebook. Well, they're not using Facebook officially, but witnessing them with sort of,
See, I would question if a lot of these things are meant for children in the first place. They're not.
Well,
you know.
Yes and no.
And this is where
you can have legal terms.
Yeah.
But then children will use them anyway, and then they will use similar techniques in other things anyway. Like Snapchat has this sort of continuous streak feature. Like, it keeps pushing you to keep using something. And I suppose none of this sort of models of addicting people to products is not new. There's been countless books written on this, but I suppose, again, as always with technology, it's the immediacy of it. The ability to get hooked in so quickly. Whereas if you're an alcoholic, you have to go to the shops and buy a drink, and, you know.
So it's that kind of immediate.
You can keep doing it. Pull out your phone, you're hooked back in again. You know, it's so much quicker.
The reinforcement is immediate rather than. So there's no delayed reinforcement. It's almost immediate reinforcement.
Exactly. But anyway, I think, like, we've discussed this topic quite a bit, and it's an ongoing topic, and it's one that I am still forming my own opinions on. But basically, the reason we added this link was to talk about this new collective, the Centre for Humane Technology. I'm actually hoping that I might even be able to pin someone down from them for an interview in the future. So we'll
that would be a great idea. Yeah, it's. I went along to the launch, and
we went along to the launch of the Good Technology Collective. That's the German one here.
Yes, correct. Yeah. And they had a couple of speakers. They had a woman from I think it was the Labour Party in Germany, and also a woman who'd formerly worked for MI5 and was very anti-technology in many ways. And that was very interesting. It was, firstly, it's great to hear women speaking about technology, because we don't always see that in Germany. It's probably better in some other places. But it was also good to, hear opinions that I may not agree with, but it was, valuable to hear why they had some of those thoughts,
All right, let's move on to a somewhat related topic. This is from Politico, and this is from Janosch Delker. I'm not sure if that's a German name, so maybe I pronounced that wrong. To protect or collect, Germany's big data divide. And, I mean, Europe-wide is more conscientious of... is more conscientious on data collection and usage than many other countries, but Germany especially. And I don't really want to dig too much into the cultural reasons as to why Germany is like this. That's not really what we want to discuss. But this article is kind of about how Germany is recognizing that its obsession with data privacy is somewhat harming it competitively in the world. And should they stick to how they currently operate with data and kind of try to be a business option for people who want that, and Germany can kind of be the main provider of privacy, basically? Or do they open themselves up and become more like other countries? And I actually asked a few friends, and of course I very much got... we should remain private from the Germans, and and don't care from the others. So, I kind of got the answers I was expecting. It's quite a cultural thing.
Just a question for you, when you're talking about like data privacy, are they talking about people's personal data? Are they talking about business data? Because I got the impression a lot of it was to do with industry data.
Industry data is obviously more financially...
like IoT.
Yeah, that's obviously more financially useful, especially to B2B work is always more financially rewarding than consumer monetization. But I think it kind of includes a little bit of everything because often those devices are collecting data on us anyway. So... and I think it's two aspects. There's kind of the industrial sabotage aspect, which comes from leaky data from industrial aspects, and then there's just the personal privacy, and they're part of the same conversation, but there's slightly different aspects of it. And I think they're looking at the aspect of both. And we also have GDPR starting very soon, which covers some of this as well. But Germany, in Germany in particular, especially with its focus on like Industry 4.0 and these sorts of aspects, it's interesting because it's coming out of the current elections fiasco here. It's almost part of the coalition negotiations about like what's our future plan going to be. We are falling behind in this. What do we do about it? Do we make the fact that we are different an actual selling point, or do we change and become like everybody else? That's kind of the discussion being had.
I get the impression the CDU and the SPD, the CDU is the Christian Democrats Union.
Yeah, they're the more conservative. Yeah.
SPD is the Social Democrats.
They're more left of centre, yeah.
Yeah, they have quite different opinions. I mean, the CDU are the people saying, well, you know, we can't do a lot of technology without the data, which is true. Yeah. And I can see a lot of points there. But I think
actually one of the parties that kind of lost out, the FDP, who are more like Macron's kind of party in France, were the ones who are much more pro kind of business. And they walked out the coalition negotiations, so they're not really going to hear much from them. Anyway, we're getting sort of more into German election politics than the actual...
Well, I wasn't actually. I just wanted to mention one of the points that they're arguing, which the SPD, the lefties, if we call them that, are saying...
Leftishes.
Leftish, sorry. They say privacy rules are a competitive advantage. Yeah. Instead of deregulating, the government should press local manufacturers to promote German products as data-safe alternatives to those from the US,
which is kind of what
China,
I said. Like,
and other trade rivals.
Do we turn it into a commercial advantage?
Like an advantage,
or do we become like everybody else and just stop that? That's kind of the... Anyway, it's interesting. We'll keep you updated, listeners.
It's wonderful, though. That's for sure.
It's I think you said it's wonderful for a second.
No, one to follow. Not wonderful.
Maybe it'll be wonderful. Depends on your perspective. All right, then, Kate. We're going to move on into something related but slightly different again about sort of responsible use of technology. This is quite an interesting article on Pitchfork from Damon Krukowski, who used to be in a band called Galaxy 500, who I vaguely remember. They were sort of a reasonable-sized kind of indie band from the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, I remember them well, yeah.
And it's an article talking about how to be a responsible music fan in the age of streaming. And as do many artists of his sort of size, i.e. not huge. Firstly, mention is like the pitiful royalty rates that artists of that caliber get on Spotify in particular. Spotify is usually picked on, although Apple Music is very fast catching up. And you don't hear as many criticisms. I don't know what the reasons for that are. But
what was he getting? I think he's got some figures.
Yeah, so you can mention it, Kate. I've dominated the intro. Okay. You mention it.
So they were getting... this is a bit of a shocker. Spotify had sent songwriting royalties of $1.05 for the 5,960 times our single Tugboat was played that quarter, split between the group's 3 members. Each of us had made 35 cents. Not exactly a promising new source of income.
No. And, it's actually interesting because, as I have mentioned in the past, I was a musician in the past, probably of a similar size as someone like Galaxy 500, actually. And I mean, I didn't actually quite realize my band's most famous album isn't actually available on any streaming platforms. I don't think for any ethical reason, just I don't think the label did the right deals. So I don't have a lot. I have less to say than I thought I did, because I actually went and did some research on this and discovered that, you know, the songs that I wrote aren't even available. Some of them are available as part of a best of album. Right. But that's, it's interesting. So, I don't even have stuff available. But I was always sort of the impression that, you know, you get more plays, you get less for each play, but you get more plays. Like, say, for example, the alternative for this would be playing the song on the radio. Now, no radio station, especially with someone like Galaxy 500, I would even challenge someone like Michael Jackson is going to play a song 5,960 times in one quarter.
That's
so, you know, it's a source of income. I think the interesting thing is, and this is sort of what he starts to get into, is it's a source of income that didn't exist before. But of course, the problem is it's supplanting the traditional forms. If it was just supplemental, it would be okay, but it's supplanting it.
It actually makes an interesting comment. It says, according to data trackers at BuzzAngle Music, more than 99% of audio streaming is of the top 10% most streamed tracks, which means less than 1% of all streams account for all of the music.
Yeah.
I find that quite shocking, actually, because I always assumed that people had very large, like myself and most people I know, have quite large, you know, collections in their music files and, you know, play them whether it's randomly or shuffling or something or other, or work. There's a delineation between your work music and your party music or what have you. I was very surprised by this.
You've actually walked right into the trap there, Kate. This is, and the reason is why is because now this is algorithm determined music. And you're getting played stuff that you want to be played. But I bet you if you could dig into the numbers, you would find you listen to the same stuff over and over again quite a lot. And how much do you surface new music? Or new,
probably not
necessarily new music, but new music to you, you know. And this is kind of what it's saying, is that it's another one of these filter bubble effects that everyone kind of gets pushed into these buckets. So it's actually unlikely. And this has always been one of Radiohead's dislikes of streaming platforms as well, is that it doesn't actually level the playing field at all. And he also talks about how there are some creators who almost tailor their music to suit streaming platforms, which, I mean, on one side you could say this is an oldie complaining about what the kids are doing and he doesn't understand it. But in some respects, it's also different. I know we talked about that before, like the idea that the album was changing because it was never or less often played in its entirety. It was played in, you know, bits and pieces. And then, like, the article is really interesting. It talks about the issue of scale with music. Like, TechStub's all about scale. I've got a whole diatribe at the moment about how VC funding is killing so many companies because it is constantly pushing for scale. Anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But he talks interestingly here about, like, for example, bands that were always quintessentially live bands. He talks specifically about the Grateful Dead, who were very much into having intimate shows for their fans. And then, of course, as they had to get bigger, the shows get bigger, but then the kind of the feeling goes. And
but why did they have big stadium concerts? Like, did they?
Because the demand was there. Of course, the demand was.
There would have been a choice there to do that, right?
Yeah, the demand is there. And so then he starts to try to figure out how you can take these similar principles and apply them to the streaming of music. I guess, like, trying to get out of your filter bubble, if possible, and listening to newer music, getting recommendations from friends instead of the algorithm, you know, making it more personal than it was, than it is. Sorry. Yeah.
So I guess there's something in that too. We should all be asking our friends for some new music recommendations. Like we used to with mixtapes and stuff, you know? Remember when we used to make mixtapes?
And there's some bizarre things here, like, so Spotify, kind of the popularity of Spotify was this shareable playlist. And there's some interesting aspects here. It says information is so lacking for the individual tracks on playlists. Some of the most listened to are by musicians who don't even exist. Which I don't know. It's quite strange. It's a separate article I'll have to read. Yeah, it's a very interesting article actually. And it covers a lot of different facets of content and culture and how it relates to music and streaming of music. Yeah. Anyway, I recommend you have a read of it, especially if you're a fan.
Yeah, no, it's definitely worth a read. It's an interesting issue, and I'd be interested to hear some of the listeners' thoughts on it as well,
And that is a good place to mention what we said at the beginning of the show, which is you can find previous episodes and show notes at gregariousmammal.com/podcast. You can support the show at /support. And now, the first of several platforms, you can find us on Facebook and you can interact with us and express your opinions. And Kate, I think you've got something planned for this week.
I have. We're going to have a poll, which I will set up this afternoon, asking people about how you find new music. You know, is it recommended by friends? Is it something you hear in a movie or a television show? Is it through going to a gig? Maybe some other things. So I'll be curious to see how people do find new music in this streaming age where we're fighting against all these algorithms. Okay, just a final little article to wrap up our section on, going over things in the news that we think are interesting. This one's from Harvard Business Review, and it's called 8 Questions to Ask Someone Other Than What Do You Do? And it's by David Burkus. And, I think we're all guilty of that one. What do you do? Or what kind of, I always try and preface it with a little bit, given I work in an expat city where a lot of people haven't found a job yet. It might be, what kind of work do you do? Are you working or studying or just resting or looking for work?
Just resting.
I use resting. It's a polite way of
unemployed.
Doing fuck all, basically.
I would also like to add to this list of banned questions, which you especially get here, is where are you from?
Where are you from?
I hate that one because I don't know how to answer it for one, and what does it matter?
Probably I get more often than where are you from? Where are you from in England?
Where are you from in England, Kate?
If they think this is an English accent, they're a little bit. It's a little bit odd because I know a lot of Germans have been to Australia, so they should know better.
Wow.
They should know better. Yeah, I would like to think people know what an Australian accent sounds like.
Yours isn't the strongest, and I am to blame. But anyway,
there are quite a diverse selection of different accents across Australia. But anyway, let's go back to these questions. So these are some questions that you could use to kind of engage people. Maybe you're at a networking event or you're at a social kind of gathering. You don't know people. I'm not sure I'd use all of these because some of them are a bit deep for me. In a 5-minute chat while someone's you're going to escape to the loo or whatever you do, go and get another drink. But I'm going to read them out and see what people think. What excites you right now? It gives others the ability to give with a work-related answer or talk about their kids or their new boat or basically anything that excites them.
It's very Harvard Business Review.
I know, right? Oh, my new boat, my new jet, and,
I use a variant of that one myself. I often say what interests you or what brings you here.
Yeah. What are you looking forward to?
Okay.
It's a nice one.
Broad, but yeah.
What's the best thing that happened to you this year?
Okay, yeah.
Where did you grow up? I think this is...
It's a bit too similar to the where are you from, although it's not quite the same. Yeah.
This one I do ask, what do you do for fun?
Yep.
Or I usually say, what are you into?
Dangerous responses, but yeah.
A lot of people, if you're at a party, they'll say, I like a drink. I like this one. It's a funny one. Who is your favourite superhero?
Yeah.
That's a hard one, and not one I must admit I've really thought about. So it's one it would take me. That could be quite a long conversation while I decided on a superhero, couldn't it? Could be quite painful for the other person.
Who is your favourite superhero, Kate?
I don't know. I actually don't know that much about superheroes, I'm afraid. Maybe someone from...
I think from mainstream
X-Men?
ones, Spider-Man.
Spider-Man.
Because he's flawed.
Is there a charitable cause you support? Interesting. Could get quite political there, couldn't it? Could be very interesting.
And then finally, what's the most important thing I should know about you? Which, I don't know, also...
Yeah, I don't like that at all.
Potential for risk there is.
Yeah, it sounds like a job interview or something. It's like that horrible question you get asked, what's your biggest weakness?
Yeah, what's your biggest weakness? I'm going to go up, next networking event, I'm going to walk up to someone and say that.
I think I used to say gin and tonics, chocolate or something.
Yeah, that's a bit lame.
Something like that.
Come on.
I don't know. What are you meant to say? Oh,
Sweet sound of children crying.
No, that's not a weakness. It's my.
That's a Cards Against Humanity answer.
I think that would be my intolerance to children.
Anyway, Kate, before we get to dangerous territory here, let's wrap this bit up and let's move on to what we've been up to and what we're up to. So I know you've been a little busy, but tell us about some. I can see a few here on your list. What's some of the? I think you've got one or two articles you've written recently here. What are you working on, and where are you going in the next few months?
Let's see. I'm working on an article with that I wrote after an interview with Schneider Electric about their use of AI in predictions and all kinds of things as it relates to energy management. Mm-hmm. That's actually a really interesting area and a really nice use case of both IoT and AI. I'm also working on a couple of articles to do with connected cars that have been sitting there for a little bit too long. And I interviewed a couple of really interesting blockchain companies. Mm-hmm. One was one that was working on how to explain it? It's always the problem with this stuff. To explain it in a soundbite is sometimes quite hard if you're not the company. Basically, they had sort of two facets. One was to do with having source code that could be easily utilized by non-technical people. So I guess maybe the developer version of what, in IoT you would refer to as plug and play. Their other component was looking at using underutilized energy in machines to do trading of transactions and things like that, and eventually looking to move that onto IoT devices as well. That's a very interesting area, and I was actually skeptical because I didn't think virtual machines were terribly successful. But the founder was actually able to give me quite a few examples to kind of research and where it had been going very well. Mm-hmm. So my ignorance perhaps there. And the other one was a company called Filament, a company that interestingly started out doing hardware for the, what would you call it? The maker community is probably the term. They did some Kickstarted stuff there. Then they moved on to sort of platform stuff and attracted a lot of interest from the industrial space. And they found people were using their stuff in industrial applications, and they were a little bit, because that's not what it's meant for. That's a bit scary. And so they moved into that space. And more recently, they're working. They've created a chip, the Brocklet chip, that is being utilised to basically provide a number of things. But the one that sort of caught my interest, if you like, given it's it's still getting into a place, was about using it for data monetization. So there could be some very interesting applications there. And I, look forward to writing that one up, hopefully today or tomorrow.
Okay. And from me over the past few weeks, what have I written? I've got a piece on what is a decentralized exchange for cryptocurrencies. I covered very briefly, although I'm going to be doing an interview soon, on Red Hat's acquisition of CoreOS. And related to that, I did a roundup of Kubernetes platforms. Yeah, and what else? There's been a few podcast episodes which you probably know already because you're listening to this. Also creating cross-platform voice applications with Jovo I can't even remember when we last did an episode, so I don't know how many of those I've mentioned already, but there's a few. I'm currently working on an article for a guide to linters, something for a presentation. And that said, I've actually got quite a few presentations coming up over the next few weeks.
You can see we've been busy.
Yeah, I'm going to be talking at Write the Docs in Amsterdam, but I'm not actually going to be there. I'm going to be doing it over VoIP. And that's on the 19th of February. I am then speaking at World Information Architecture Day here in Berlin on the 24th, which is actually about information architecture and ethics. I'm still figuring out quite what I'm going to say there, which feeds into some of the stuff we were talking about earlier. Then Cate and I, at the end of February, will be at Mobile World Congress, lining up a lot of interviews.
In Barcelona.
And then in a few months' time, I'm actually going to be in the US a few times, but I'll get back to you with more details.
I'll also be here in Berlin at Bosch Connected World, which is a big
You should add that to the website, Cate.
I will. I'll do that today. An IoT conference, 20th to the 23rd or 22nd, of February. So in a few weeks.
Yep. All right then. So thanks very much for listening, everybody. That was our little roundup of links that have interested us. Coming up on the podcast next after this show is an interview with Iva, who make an AI that composes music. And it was a fascinating interview, and I hope you'll enjoy that when it's published. One more time, you can find previous shows at gregariousmammal.com/podcast. You can support us at gregariousmammal.com/support. You can find us on Facebook. And now, finally, our mailing list is actually live, which you can also find at /support. I sent the first issue out last week, and there's another one coming soon. How can the good people find and talk to you, Cate?
They can find me at probably Twitter is the most easy and less painful for people. My Twitter handle is at Kate_Lawrence, and that's Kate with a C and Lawrence with a W.
And I believe you also have a website.
I do. KateLawrence.com.
Same spelling, no underscore.
Yep, C and a W.
We just need to record you saying that once and just keep playing it back.
We totally do. That would be much. Maybe make it into a jingle or something.
It's Kate with a C, Lawrence with a W, etc. And you can find me at Chris Chinch on Twitter or christianchiller.com. Yes.
That's how. Yes, we're not very good at that kind of.
We feel like they have to be with a fake American accent. I'm not sure why.
Yeah, we're quite laconic because of my Australian background. I don't really do the and if you want to find out more, you can contact us at twitter.com or whatever. Yeah,
don't contact us at twitter.com. That's for sure.
That might be not right.
Actually, in unrelated news, do you know that Twitter has reported its first profitable quarter ever?
I did see that.
Which I didn't add to
I did have a snigger.
Yeah.
That's just because they started putting ads on, that's all.
No, it's Donald Trump.
Is
probably.
it?
I don't know. Who knows? Anyway, we are now danger of having a second show here. So let's wrap things up. And, you will hear from us next time. Thanks for listening.
Okay, over and out. Thanks for listening.